Sir, could use some more assistance here.
Over time, it is easy to look past so many games. You become content with your tastes. Some titles reach a level of quality that end up diminishing the possibility of giving the game a chance. For me, playing DUSK and ULTRAKILL became the two pillars of what a boomer shooter, or retro-inspired shooter, should aspire to be. A subgenre that embraces retro gaming with a modernized take, bringing old fans and new fans of the shooter genre together. It's a genre though that's become more and more saturated over the years. The Doom or Quake methods are now starting to become more stale over time, where other sources of inspiration are needed to keep things fresh or to supply a new coat of paint. Take for instance the combination of roguelike gaming and retro shooters. Taking mechanics and the randomized runs and applying them into a shooter has made for a perfect marriage. Take Deadlink and RoboQuest for instance. They're polished to a T, have a nice art style, and their randomized nature makes for near infinite replayability. Adding in new arrays of gameplay and progression systems, and dynamic pacing, as well as unique mechanics, is how you keep a genre expanding without it going to rust. Because of this, I've naturally ignored a lot of shooters that seem by the numbers to me. It takes a lot more to genuinely impress me in the retro shooter scene nowadays. Sometimes though, you do play something that is enjoyable enough to merit a playthrough, even if it's not exactly the most unique shooter you've played, and sometimes you'll finally pick something that is not only incredibly fun to play, but also establishes its flow of pacing and gameplay. The game that has genuinely surprised me is a game that is of this video, Turbo Overkill. Over the years, I've tried several retro shooters, Postal Brain Damaged and Bolt Gun were titles with a lot of polish and charm to them. They were close to my favorites, with Postal breaking into the top 5 and replacing Horot. Turbo Overkill replaces Proteus. The difference in quality between the two is night and day. Throughout my playthrough of Turbo Overkill, it only confirmed this, and I was feeling the same spark like I did with DUSK and ULTRAKILL, making this game the closest to being just as good as those two, in my opinion. I felt at the time, and maybe still do, that Turbo Overkill, like I've already just said but in a different way, is the best retro shooter I've played since those two games. The opinions may vary, but sometimes you'll get a distinct feeling of immense joy at the experience of something that is close to perfect. Turbo Overkill was one of those games to do it. The game is the culmination of the trials and errors of a veteran developer that was able to realize an idea with years of experience in the Doom community, providing his own content, including the Total Conversion mod Total Chaos, the most eye-opening project for Doom 2 out there. Traces of Doom's DNA is undoubtedly in this game. The fast-paced nature of the combat zones to the scenes of your protagonist showing how badass he is, and the destructive arsenal that your character possesses. So, let's get into the meat grinder and see what lies beyond the corpse-infested cyberpunk world of Turbo Overkill. In this game, you play as Johnny Turbo, a street cleaner in the city of Paradise, tasked with destroying an AI called Sin, who is undertaking a malevolent plan to take over the world and reshape it in its own image. And since your character never speaks, his chainsaw legs and weapons do the talking instead. At first, it appears to be in a typical cyberpunk setting, large megastructures, showered with holograms and neon lights, but instead of going out for a city trip, you're cleaning the place up of augmented enemies that want to kill you as much as you want to kill them. Over time, the story itself unfolds and the world changes along with it, as evidenced in Chapter 2 and 3. As for the lore and story elements themselves, like the history of the place and its inhabitants, it's there if you're a lore fiend, but it's not essential to understanding the story of this game. The narrative itself is done decently well. I see it as more of a complementary element of a game that is carried big time by its excellent gameplay loop and polished mechanics that make the game genuinely fun to play. You learn more about Johnny himself by finding collectibles that show recordings from other people that talk to you or about you. Some of the collectives give the player access to new levels and new bits of information about the game's universe. For the sake of completing everything, you'll have to look through every nook and cranny of the game's multi-layered design levels. The levels themselves are quite extensive, and will keep you busy with the amount of exploration and fights that will occur. Fans of Doom and Quake will recognize the symptoms of this game's map design, where you find collectibles for completionist results and keys to eventually reach the exit. Each level does have its own layouts and mechanisms that slowly introduce more of the game's world, alongside new enemy types that challenge the player in different ways, eventually culminating in a fast and intensive slaughterfest, and one that comes with its own obstacles. In retro shooters, lore, world building, and storytelling are treated as a cherry on top. It's great when the rest of the game is well done, but it's ultimately wasted when it isn't. In the case of Turbo Overkill, that is not the case, thankfully. Instead, you have some of the most engaging combat that you'll find alongside other shooters like Doom Eternal, ULTRAKILL, or DUSK. The weapons have amazing feedback, are quick to select, and on top of the game's augmentations, can lead to a myriad of different advantages in combat situations. The character gains access to these modules with different properties that in time make up a build for your character. I opted for a build that depended on sustainability in combat while using the chainsaw, giving me health and shields with each kill. However, which ones you do choose ultimately depends on what your playstyle will be. There are enough modules to unlock in this game to allow variety, encouraging multiple playthroughs, and the extension of your weapon's capabilities add to this effect as well. Over time, using the currency you collect as well as progressing through the story, you'll be able to obtain upgrades for your weapons, with some dramatic effects to the weapons themselves. Like for instance your submachine gun. Through upgrades you can go from an akimbo piece to a single gun to an assault rifle, or the chain gun that can be turned into a flamethrower. The magnum, or the starting pistol, with enough consistent shots, can then turn into a powerful revolver that can be used as long as your accuracy and pacing holds together, but this is only obtainable once you get the final upgrade for it. The utility that is within your arsenal is extensive, and a lot of the weapons have unique effects and uses to them, and when fully utilized, it all makes for a chaotic and effective gameplay experience that will help immensely in the later levels, when the challenge really starts to shake up. This game can be pretty challenging even on the normal difficulty. Enemies are constantly going forward towards you. Damage is so seamless, most of the time you might not even notice it in the heat of combat. You have little to no reprieve at all, which can be an exhausting affair for some people. Those that are already used to fast-paced shooters will naturally keep up, but long-term gameplay for something like this can lead to fatigue for some people, considering how long the levels are and how much fighting you have to go through. But if the gameplay loop is already fun and enjoyable, then there shouldn't be much of a hindrance for most players. Would not recommend the harder difficulties for a first-time player though, at least not until you've gotten a good grasp on the game's core mechanics and the principles behind each weapon, and what they're good against. In terms of health and armor, it's very easy to lose due to the volume of enemies and projectiles that are being thrown towards you, even with upgrades that give you more health. You have to act quick and move fast if you want to survive in this nightmarish depiction of a cyberpunk world. The enemies themselves each have distinctive designs, and each of them serve a different function during combat. Some will bum rush you, applying pressure, deploying shields to force you into either maneuvering or using the shotgun mod that creates a shock effect, or large foes that use heavy weaponry to pose a bigger threat. The designs are pretty neat, with a mix of humanoid and monstrous enemies that all fit together in each arena. The game also has a few boss fights. They consist of having a lot of health and some tricks up their sleeve, but they generally have a consistent pattern that you can eventually follow and use to your advantage. It's just a matter of keeping up with them and not getting hit too often. I mentioned the weapons before, but I'll talk about the chainsaw itself. This is such a cool mobility device. Sliding down in hordes of cannon fodder or other enemies only to just reduce them into meat chunks makes for a really satisfying experience when you do it all the time. It's kind of like going down a water slide really, and with certain modules you can use this to quickly gain armor and health in dire situations. Later on you'll get a slow mobility in chapter 2 that you can use to either assess surrounding enemies during combat or during boss fights when they're going at high speeds. You also have the micro missile that you can use for massive damage, and it can track multiple targets simultaneously too. In episode 3 you'll eventually get chainsaws for your arms, which you can then use to go into a frenzy and really tear shit up, provided that it's charged up. It's a game that is rich with upgrades, weaponry, and abilities that make for dynamic combat, and what sets it apart from other retro shooters that I've played since going through DUSK and ULTRAKILL is just how well realized the experience is. The music is also another highlight, filled with a fusion of electronic, metal, and orchestral sound pieces. It shines brighter than the sound design itself, which is decent on its own, but not as explosive or as satisfying as something like, say, Doom Eternal. But sound design is one of those things that resonates with individuals differently. I could see myself cherry picking a few tracks during workouts, but not something to fall asleep to. There's a lot going on for this game, and a lot of it has been done by one person who has had the assistance of other content creators providing feedback and contributions, as well as support from Trigger Happy and Apogee to bring the game into the fold. Beyond the threshold of its brilliant campaign, packed with 3 episodes making for a sizable experience, it also comes with an arcade mode where you play the levels with the highest score possible, as well as an endless mode where you go for as long as you can. And also, not to mention, a level editor, something that the developer himself wanted to add due to his experience with Doom and also the benefits that come with having a level editor. Level editors are always something to cherish in shooters, because as long as they exist, the source of near infinite content can always be renewed, adding more replayability over time. It has its own browser, or you can use the Steam Workshop to find said levels. If you're creative enough, you can even create your own. There aren't a lot of resources for learning how to make levels on the internet, but once you get past the barrier of navigating its UI and its functions, it's then a matter of using your creative juices to create your own kind of level. Haven't found any signs of modding though, but it would be cool to eventually allow some implementation of modding beyond the level editor, from conversion projects to texture packs, sound and weapon changes, or even the inclusion of new models entirely that would enhance an already fantastic game. But for now, it's a what if, and it's ultimately up to the developer to allow those things to occur. Moving on. And yes, before I forget, the vehicles. This game has them, the motorbike and the car. Some levels will lead you to using one or the other, with one level being essential to use the bike and another where you have to fly to remote buildings. Navigating itself is not too bad, the weapons on the vehicles are destructive and fun, but you won't be using them as much for the most part other than when it's mandatory. But it's always nice to see some vehicular combat in a retro shooter, something I wouldn't mind seeing in a new Doom installment, for instance. And so, that's Turbo Overkill, a fantastic retro shooter with a well implemented and realized gameplay loop that makes for chaotic and dynamic combat, with tons of weapons to play around with, upgrades to change builds, and a ton of levels with great design that encourage exploration for the collectibles. It's another game that I found to be close to perfect in this particular genre of shooters. However, the difficulty can be a make or break factor. It's fine for the seasoned player, but for first time players in the retro shooter scene, they will be faced with a number of obstacles and situations that can be overwhelming and sometimes be unfair. You take damage very quickly and can sometimes die without realizing what happened. It's made to be challenging, but the kind of challenge it represents will be a deciding factor in regards to whether you'll continue or move on. In saying that, I highly recommend giving this game a chance if you're in the market for a retro-inspired shooter. If you're unsure, there's a demo that you can try that gives you enough of an experience to let you come to your conclusions. I look forward to the next installment and what improvements may come of it, but time will tell. Stay tuned, and thank you for watching.
You must have known you'd end up on the other side of the barrel at some point, Johnny. Oh, pucker up and kiss this for me, Johnny!